Macro extension tubes can turn any regular zoom lens like this one into a close focusing macro lens. But is that as good as using a dedicated macro lens like this one? Well, in this week's video, I'm going to try and find out. So this is my usual macro lens. It is Canon's 100mm f2.8. It can take beautiful close-up photos, but it does cost hundreds and hundreds of, well, whatever currency you care to measure it in. So spending that kind of money on something dedicated to macro photography might be a bit of a stretch for many people. Whereas these are macro extension tubes. Now what these do is sit between your lens and your camera body, and in so doing allow you to focus much closer than you would normally be able to. Essentially turning a regular lens, just like this one, into a macro lens. And the great thing is that this set of macro extension tubes only cost me about £30 on Amazon. So the question is, if you've already got a really good lens, let's say it's Canon's 24-105, this is the f4 version, the L series lens, so basically a professional quality lens. What happens if you pair a lens like this with macro extension tubes? Can you get professional macro results on par with using a dedicated macro lens? Well, that's what I'm going to put to the test right now. So I've got a nice simple scene set up here with this lovely velvety red rose. And I've just put a little drop of vegetable glycerin on one of the petals here. Now, vegetable glycerin is thicker than water, but it's otherwise completely clear. It's really helpful because it means that when you put a little drop on a leaf like this, it actually stays there for some time rather than just immediately falls off. Now I'm lighting this with a single LED light with a reflector dish on it. That's creating quite a harsh beam of light, and that is going to help keep those shadows on the rose and therefore keep that contrast. But I'll be taking this shot twice. First of all with the macro 100mm lens on here, and then again with the 24-105 zoom lens using the extension tubes. And that way we can take a look at how each setup takes its macro shots differently. So this is pretty much the shot that I'm going for at the moment. It looks a little exposed for some reason on the back of camera, but it's actually not that bad once you take the shot. As you can see, we've focused in really close, pretty much as close focusing as this macro lens can achieve. We've got our focus point set absolutely on this droplet of liquid on the edge of the petal, which I just think looks really, really nice. It is not the most exciting of scenes, but it should be a good example for this shot. Let's turn my ISO down to ISO 100, that's the base amount, f8 for sharpness, and maybe something around 1/6 of a second, tap to shoot. And then we've got a really nice looking shot. And already I can see that this looks nice and sharp. There's tons of detail on that droplet. So already I think that's a pretty nice shot. So let's try and not touch this rose at all. Don't want to disturb that little droplet. I'm going to switch the lens though, take off the 100mm macro, put that down over here, and then pop on the 24-105. And I have a range of macro extension tubes. I have a very small one, there is a medium one, and then there is this larger one. And just for the sake of speed, I'm just going to go ahead and put this larger one on because I think that's probably the one that we'll need to use. You can stack them up and I may give that a go, but just for the sake of speed and efficiency in the video, we're just going to go with this one for now. So let's pop it on and go back into live view. So straight away we are clearly out of focus, but also it's currently set at 24mm, and you can see very blurrily how small the rose is in the frame. Okay, zoomed into I think pretty much 100mm. Let's check our focus again because it's probably fallen off. It has. That looks nice and sharp on the edge of this water droplet. Zoom back out. The settings haven't changed, the camera position hasn't changed, we're still at f8 for our aperture, ISO 100 and 1/6 of a second. So let's just tap to take our shot. And that looks really, really nice, exactly as nice as it looked on the other one. But let's take a look at the images together. So this is one that we have just taken on the 24-105 with the extension tube. This is the one that we took on the 100mm macro. Now, the main thing that's clearly noticeable is the huge difference in effective focal length. This shot is much more zoomed in. We don't see almost any of this petal down here. It's really filled the frame with this petal here and the water droplet, whereas the 24-105 is more zoomed out. It's captured more of this petal here, more of the rose in general. And that's really weird, because if we just take a look at the actual information, you can see the lens detail here, but it says 100mm. And this shot also 100mm. So as far as the camera is concerned, these are both 100mm images, and yet very clearly there is a massive difference in how these shots look. I'll be honest, I've never directly compared macro extension tubes and an actual macro lens before, and I'm already really taken aback at the different sort of focal length looks from both lenses, despite the fact that both images are 100mm. I really assumed that it would be exactly the same, and I'm not really sure why that isn't. But what I'm going to do is put some of the other macro extension tubes that I have onto this as well, and see if we can get this 24-105 focusing as close up and getting basically the same frame as we would have got from the 100mm macro. So I've got the medium and I've got the small ring. I'm going to combine them, and I'm going to then put that onto the back of this. So we've now got a longer lens with a full suite of extension tubes on. Let's give this a go, see where we get to. We're now maybe, what's that, 2 inches, 2.5 inches between the lens element and the rose itself. So this is very, very close up stuff now. Let's turn it on, back to 100mm. So I might be wrong, but to my eye already, this looks like almost exactly the same framing we had from the 100mm macro lens. So I definitely think that adding these extra extension tubes has taken this lens closer to the actual macro one. Zoom in on the droplet. Doesn't look quite as sharp though, is the only thing. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what these look like on our actual computer screen. But let's get the shot. That's looking really nice. Let's just take a look. So this was the 24-105 with just the one extension tube. This was the same again, but this was our 100. And if we just pay attention, we just got a little hint of that petal down here. This one goes off here. I think that is pretty much the same. So definitely some interesting results so far, but why don't we take these photos into Lightroom and we can have a close-up look at those details. So here we are over in Lightroom, and already I can see that we've got some interesting shots to look at. This is the one that was taken with, as we can now just see on screen, the 100mm macro lens, and I've given that 5 stars just so I know 5 means the macro lens. 3 is the one I have named, I have put the against for the 24-105. So if we highlight these 2 shots so we can just have a look at them. This then is the 24-105 with those all three extension tubes. This is the one taken with the actual macro lens. And if we just quickly flick back and forth, it is very difficult to tell any difference at all. The focus is great. We've got close up. The settings haven't changed, of course. We can see that if we just take a quick look up here. F8. ISO 100, it actually says 95mm, but it's pretty much 100. Our settings have not changed. The lighting hasn't changed. The setup hasn't changed. It's just down to the lens that we are using. And really, I am impressed that we have been able to get so close with that lens. But when we start to get a little bit closer up, we really, really pixel peep at those tiny details, it is easier to see where those differences are. Let's have a close-up look on this water droplet itself. Now on the 100mm macro, it's very, very clean line around there. Look at this specular highlight here. It's a pure white speck against the black background. There's lots and lots of detail. And bear in mind that you could get this even clearer if we had focus stacked the image from front to back, but instead we haven't. We've just gone with that selective focus at f8. But if we have a look at the other shot, the one from the 24-105, and we zoom in again, it starts to become clearer that we don't have the same level of image quality. We've got some gradation around, degradation rather, the degrading of the image is not as sharp around the outside of this water droplet, even though we had the exact same focus point. We'd made sure that we zoomed in and manually focused right on it to make it pin sharp. It isn't sharp, it isn't clear. This highlight here, instead of it being a pure white circle against a black ring, instead we've got this chromatic aberration. We've got these problems going on with this blue fringing and this yellow on this side and this other bits going on. It isn't as clear, it isn't as high quality. If we just quickly flick back and forth between those, you can see that difference very easily. Look at the difference in clarity that we've got here as well. This is almost blurred, but here it's pin sharp. We've got beautiful details on one. This one here, lovely stuff. This one, it's definitely not quite as good. But when you look at the images like this, you would struggle to tell there's much difference. Maybe unless you really know what you're looking for. Again, this highlight in particular, this tiny specular highlight, you can tell is different between those two images if we just flick back and forth quickly. But overall, it's pretty good. And of course, having that 24-105 meant that we can then zoom out and get shots like this. This is completely untouched. This was at 80mm. This is the closest we could focus with the extension tube on, which I think is a really, really lovely shot. It's not macro, but it is definitely still close up. So what have we actually learned from doing this then? Well, I guess the main thing is that you don't necessarily need to get a professional macro lens. If you get those extension tubes and you've already got a decent quality lens, then you can put those tubes on that zoom lens and you can use it as you would with any other macro lens. We've shown very clearly that we can get basically the exact same close-up macro shots with either setup. And for 90% of the people out there wanting to just dabble with macro without investing in those expensive lenses, this is such a great way to start. It's a great way for you to get those macro shots, give it a go, see what you feel, see if it excites you as a genre before you spend £600, £700, £800, £900, whatever, on a proper macro setup. The more dedicated macro shooters among you, or the ones who are maybe trying to do this professionally, that is when it is worth investing in that macro lens. As we've seen, those details are much higher quality when we're not using those extension tubes. So I guess if we are answering the question of, are macro extension tubes as good as having a proper macro lens? The answer probably is no. Strictly speaking, it is not as good when you really zoom up close on those details, but for most people and for most of those shots that you might want to get, it will absolutely do the job really well. So think about what it is that you want to get from your macro. Do you just want to post some cool shots of some flowers you've seen on your Instagram page or Facebook, or send it over WhatsApp to your friends? If so, this kind of setup, these cheap macro extension tubes, are a great way to get into macro photography. If you do want to take things more seriously, and if you do want to get the best image quality possible, that is when it is worth spending the money on something like this. But that does bring me to an end of this video. I really hope that you found it useful. I have actually found it really interesting to see just how close these two setups can get. But if you have enjoyed this video, do please hit that like button and consider subscribing to my channel if you don't already, and I will see you next time.